Shalom. Call Halal Yahweh Bashim Abishai Bashim Bakakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders. Salutations to all my fellow laborers doing this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so now more so than ever. To the scattered elect that are scattered around the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, the Israelite foreigners. To the Akwaf that are listening and learning. This is your brother Malcolm from the branch of the Great Millstone here in Chicago, coming at you with another lesson in truth. And this video that I'm about to profile, I'm just gonna read a group of scriptures and just kind of let it play. And this is one of those videos that you'd have to go watch the whole thing, because I'm not gonna play the whole video. But it really, the narrator of this video, which is Hip Hughes, he really goes into depth and detail, doesn't spare the feelings, and of anyone when he brings out this very shameful history about America and his treatment of the Israelites here in America. Of course, he doesn't use that term, because what's the saying is that, when Esau tells you the truth, for every truth that he tells you, he gives you two lies. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into the scriptures, all right? Because he's going to break it down. I mean, I could do it, but I'm going to allow him to do it, But this is as far as what Jim Crow is and its effects and what it did. But this is Psalms 94 and 20. And it reads, "Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? They gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous and condemn the innocent blood. But Yahweh is my defense, and my power is the rock of my refuge. And he shall bring upon them their own iniquity, and they shall be cut off in their own wickedness. Yeah, Yahweh, our power, shall cut them off." And he will.
Warning: if you do not know the significance of the 14th Amendment, watch at your own risk. A 14th Amendment video is linked in the description for your learning convenience.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. We're going to take a quick look at the term Jim Crow, its meaning, its influence, its impact on the United States of America, because you need to know, whether you're a kid in school, whether you're a lifelong learner, or whether you're cray-cray in the internet, understanding Jim Crow should be a requirement of citizenship. So let's talk a little bit about the origin of the word Jim Crow before we go into kind of the concept of de jure and de facto segregation. Jump Jim Crow was an old song and dance routine that originated in 1828, which was written by a white comedian by the name of T.D. Daddy Rice, who would perform in blackface, basically to make fun of slaves.
Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow.
The term Jim itself is short for Jimmy, like I'm going to Jimmy a lock, and that was a crowbar. So a crowbar in the 1800s was sometimes called a Jim or a Jimmy. And then, of course, crow itself was used as a term for blacks as early as the 1700s. In terms of jump Jim Crow, farmers used to feed their crows corn-soaked whiskey. Then the crows would get drunk and kind of dance around, not being able to fly, as the farmers kind of beat the crows to death. So there's multiple meanings behind the term Jim Crow.
They're wicked even to the animals. This is Psalms 58 and 2. "Yeah, in your heart ye work wickedness, ye weigh the violence of your hands in the earth."
Refer in a negative connotation to slaves and to freedmen, to blacks, and now we're going to turn that term Jim Crow into a system of racial oppression. So Jim Crow laws, and that would be segregation de jure, meaning that by jurisdiction, local and state ordinance, and we're also going to talk about federal ordinances, which mandate by law segregation. Now, early on, right after...
Now, these are very important terms. Segregation de jure means jurisdiction, segregation by jurisdiction. This is Isaiah 10:1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees and write grievousness which they have prescribed.
For the Civil War, that's where we're going to start in 1865. We still had those southern governments that were being controlled by kind of Confederate forces. So those southern white Democratic dominated legislatures would pass something called black codes right after the Civil War that severely limited the rights of these new freedmen. And most of these black codes were based on vagrancy laws, where if you were black, you had to prove that you had a job and that job was recognized by whites. And if you couldn't do that, you would be forced into labor. You could be put in prison and then kind of, leased out to people in order to do jobs. So many historians have called black codes slavery by another name. But that's going to change during Reconstruction, because starting in 1867, the Republican-dominated Congress is going to basically mandate, through the enforcement of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, the military occupation of the South. This is the period of history from basically 1867 to 1877, about a decade, called Reconstruction.
And all that did was that ensured that the newly found free slaves who were, what's the word that I'm looking for? The word that I'm looking for is, emancipated. They were transferred from one ownership to another. So they were transferred from the slave owners, all right, to the U.S. government. So they weren't doing this for the slaves. They were doing this because they wanted cheap labor and they wanted free citizens to perform that cheap labor.
During Reconstruction, the black codes were eliminated, and for the most part, African Americans were allowed to vote. And you did have African Americans that were elected to high office. You had governors. There was a African American senator. There were African American state legislators. So it was kind of working, but of course, it's all being held together by military occupation. And then there was an incident in Louisiana in 1873 called the Colfax massacre, and this is really kind of the Southern Democratic forces trying to coalesce around groups in order to...
But you jakes today love them Democrats and think that the Democratic Party is for you. There is no party for you. This is not your rest. We will not rest until this place goes down. If you don't have that mindset or that mentality, then you're part of the problem if you're an Israelite.
Take back what they see as their rightful place as leaders of these southern governments. And in Louisiana, at the Colfax massacre in 1873, there was a group called the White League. And this White League, unlike the Klan, which was kind of a terrorist under the ground organization, the White Leagues and the Red Shirts, groups throughout the South, were open about their, opposition to African American rights and their wanting of power. So at Colfax, this White League basically attacked a courthouse that was being held by Republican forces, and we basically have a mini civil war at Colfax. We ended up having about 150 African Americans that were murdered, maybe more. We're not really sure about mass graves and people that were thrown into the river and such, but that culminated in a federal trial with the conviction of some of those people who did that, based on the 1870 Enforcement Act, saying that Congress is going to have the ability to prosecute people that are violating the rights of freedmen. In 1876, the Supreme Court comes out with a decision called United States versus Cruikshank, where they basically kind of take the teeth out of the Enforcement Act by saying that because this White League was not a government group but a private organization, the Enforcement Act didn't hold, that private groups could discriminate. You had to get them a different way. You probably had to use state and local courts, which weren't going to work back then. So that,
you see that? So they amended themselves, wrote themselves a back door around their own laws, and that's what they do today. That's why you have amendments.
That's kind of a breakdown of federal control over, the southern governments and the rise of what's going to become Jim Crow. And then really it all falls apart in the election of 1876. You can watch, there's a video on the Compromise of 1877. You can click down in the description below to watch that. But basically there is a deal in the presidential election where the Southern Democrats kind of give their votes to the Republicans in Rutherford v. Hayes. Samuel Tilden, the Democrat, lost, even though he was from New York. That's another story. But the sticking point, the compromise, the sellout is going to be the end of military occupation in the South by Reconstruction forces, that they're going to be able to own their governments again. And this is really the beginning of the birth of Jim Crow and segregation.
And the horrible segregation and the horrible times and things that came upon Jacob, because they got no justice whatsoever. Right? They were murdered, they were hung. But see, prior to this whole time, they just weren't hanging as slaves. All that hanging went on during the Jim Crow era. And he goes on to tell you how brutal, unfair, and how the development of Jacob was completely arrested, to make sure that Jacob had no substance or nothing to leave to his children or his children's children, to make sure that they were perpetually poor and in the lowest class possible. All right, the unfair treatment in housing and banking and voting. I mean, you name it. And then they put all these laws together, which kept Jacob in and out of prison. All right, and this is also how you know that the Jewish people is no way on God's green earth that they could be the people of the Lord, because this precept, and this will be the last one, this didn't happen to them. They don't fit this in any way, any form whatsoever. All right, but it reads, "But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth, for a spoil, and none restore." All right, so they didn't restore anything to them, and Jewish people, quite frankly, do not fill up prison houses. The sons of Jacob do. All right, why? Because a lot of these unrighteous decrees that they decree are still in place to this day. All right, the 13th Amendment is still there. They haven't gotten rid of it. So with that, I want to give all praises, glory, and honor unto Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Shem Rakakwadash. And check out this video. Watch the actual video. It's called Jim Crow and America's, let me pan down a little bit. There you go, so you can get it in the frame. Jim Crow and America's Racism Explained. Because there's a lot of history and a lot of terms, law terms, that are broken down in here. It's just to show you the genuine hatred for Jake, and how nothing has changed to this day. Then they were never given any sort of reparations for this. All right, so call Halal Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, Ba'Hashem Rakakwadash, and Wa Abba Babal. Shalom.